Hello, and welcome to the 2022 Fairbanks Information Session and Workshop for the Individual Artist Awards program. My name is Enzina Marari. I am a program officer here at the foundation. This information session is a hands-on workshop and basic information about the Individual Artist Awards to provide you with some information and tools to make your application stronger. We'll get started in just a couple minutes, and I just want to do a couple of introductions before we begin the program. So I do want to acknowledge a few of my Rasmussen Foundation team members on the call, if you're, when I call your name, if you could wave so everyone can see who you are. I want to acknowledge Zuli Mason, who is our incredible events and programs contractor, Karen Lowell, who provides excellent artistic support. And if you've contacted the foundation with questions, I'm sure you've talked extensively with Karen. We have Nicholas Conrad, who is our IT consultant, and of course, my colleague, Monica Garcia Ichuak, who I will pass it on to introduce herself.
Good evening, and thank you, Enzina. My name is Monica Garcia Ichuak. I am a program officer with the Rasmussen Foundation, and I am in support of the Individual Artist Awards with Enzina, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight with all of you.
And of course, this is a Fairbanks information session, and we are so excited to be partnering with the Fairbanks Arts Association. And we're joined by Associate Director Megan Olson-Saville, who will properly introduce herself and the work of the Fairbanks Arts Association and root us in our time together today. Megan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. It's so good to see so many faces that we recognize that we haven't seen in a while. My name is Megan Olson-Saville, and I am the Associate Director at Fairbanks Arts Association and have been for a few years now. Before I continue, I wanted to acknowledge that our organization and its work take place on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Lower Tanana people. We acknowledge this with gratitude for the Indigenous communities who have held relationships with this land for generations. We acknowledge this as a point of reflection as we engage in work that seeks to help create a healthier community in and through the arts. Thank you for joining us. A little bit about Fairbanks Arts Association. Fairbanks Arts is a nonprofit organization with the mission to promote traditional and contemporary arts in interior Alaska. Although a non-governmental entity, we are by resolution the official arts organization for both the city of Fairbanks and the borough. Through programs and services, our organization seeks to create a healthier and more vibrant community in and through the arts. To do so, our activities reach multi-generational and varied audiences, from artists to arts participants and to different organizations that we partner with. Feel free to message me any questions you may have about Fairbanks Arts, or to head on over to our website, fairbanksarts.org.
Thank you so much, Megan, and thank you for rooting us in place and in our time together today. Before we jump into the information and workshop session, I just want to ground us in what we'll be going over. And so we will just do a really quick introduction to the Rasmussen Foundation and our history. We'll talk about the Individual Artist Awards program and where it got its start. We'll do a walkthrough of the application portal and then talk about the different components of the application. It is a 90-minute presentation, and we're hoping that we'll have some time at the end for a Q&A. However, we encourage you to put questions as they come up for you in the chat. And if we don't get to them tonight, we will make sure to get those questions answered for you. Just a few housekeeping steps. We do have closed captioning available. And so if you'd like to see subtitles appear on your screen, please in your ribbons function or the more function under your Zoom, you can click show subtitle, and then those closed captionings will appear. We are also recording this session, so we will be sharing this out to attendees afterward. And feel free to use your reactions features as they come up for you. We also ask that you mute yourself unless you are asking a question at the end. So real quickly, the Rasmussen Foundation is a grant-making organization. It's a philanthropic organization that began in 1955. And the overall mission of the Rasmussen Foundation is to make life better for Alaskans. It began in 1955 by Jenny Olson Rasmussen, who moved to Yakutat, Alaska in the early 1900s as a missionary. And there she met her husband, E.A., who had also immigrated from Sweden as a teacher. They married and had a son, Elmer Rasmussen. In 1955, Jenny began the foundation to honor her late husband, E.A. And the first grant that the foundation ever made was $250 for a projector to a church out in the valley here in Alaska. And since that time, the foundation has granted over $420 million. In 2000, their son Elmer, who made much of his wealth in the banking industry, passed away and left his personal fortune, which is what we see that has made the type of grant making since 1955. Arts and culture is one of the investment areas. Now, the mission of making life better for Alaskans is quite broad, and we see the foundation investing in several different social service areas: health, education, homelessness, and housing, food and hunger. But arts and culture has been a family value of the Rasmussen Foundation. And these investments are made directly to artists, which is why we're here today, to arts organizations and communities. In fact, Elmer Rasmussen started the Alaska Heritage Museum, which is in the Wells Fargo building, which is where the Rasmussen Foundation is housed. It was formerly the First Bank of Alaska. And at the time, Elmer saw many tourists coming to Alaska, buying art from Alaska Native and Indigenous artists and taking that art outside of Alaska. He really felt that this work needed to remain in Alaska. And so he would make these purchases directly from artists and then house these art pieces, artworks, and artifacts within Alaska so they would stay. Again, we're here for the Individual Artist Awards program, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Monica, to introduce us to the Individual Artist Awards.
Great, thanks, Enzina. I think what's really unique about the Individual Artist Award program is, since its inception in 2004, it's just sort of the comprehensiveness of the strategic initiative at the board level, at the foundation, and its effort to really support the arts and culture of individual artists across the state, which is really unique to a lot of family foundations. The purpose of the program is to really dedicate not only time and resources to a serious artistic endeavor and exploration for individual artists to really take their practice to the next level and to really impact that growth for yourselves. And by doing so, that strengthens the state of Alaska, not only in networking and connecting artists to each other, but also to your own practice. So since the inception of the program in 2004, the Rasmussen Foundation has granted over 585 grants to artists, representing 53 different communities across the state. And so I just think that's a huge accomplishment in how we show up in the work and how we support artists. There are 3 separate awards. There is the Distinguished Artist Award, which we won't be talking about tonight. We'll talk a little bit about some of the way you can get involved in that nomination process. But for the purposes of this evening, we really want to talk about the Project Awards and the Fellowship Awards. The Project Awards are $7,500. We grant 25 of those grants. They are for short-term projects. So they are for all career stages and for all disciplines. And again, this is an opportunity for artists to kind of think about a short-term project that they really want to get accomplished. The fellowship program, those are a little bit higher. They're $18,000. They are 10 awards, unrestricted. They're also short-term, but they are geared towards mid-career and mature artists, those that have been just a little more seasoned, but also in selected disciplines. And so every other year we alternate disciplines, and we'll get to that as well. What is really key for all of you to know for showing up tonight is that the deadline is approaching. So the deadline to apply for the Individual Artist Award is March 1st. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Enzina to talk a little bit more in depth about the nuances of the emerging, mid-career, and the mature categories.
Thanks so much, Monica. Yeah, you know, we get asked all of the time, how to identify where my career stage is? What if I'm in the middle of being an emerging or mid-career artist? And so these definitions are also included in the guidelines, but the award program is really intended for artists that are practicing artists. They have a developed body of work. They may be new in their career stage, or they may be early in their art making practice. So they're kind of more of an emerging artist, but they have a developed body or portfolio of work. This program is really not designed for someone who is just getting into art making, or maybe doesn't have a rooted practice but has a really great idea for an art project. This program is really for artists who are serious about their work and have invested time into their practice and can demonstrate that in a variety of ways. So an emerging artist is early in their career, but their work has already begun to take shape, and they have an artistic voice that has a promise of future development. Now, a mid-career artist is someone who, again, has a developed and independent body of work, but can also demonstrate years of investment into that process and recognition in some way. And this type of recognition or representation is going to vary depending on your craft. If you're a visual artist, it might be exhibition, or if you're a musician, it might be performing shows or recording albums. It's really going to vary based on what your craft is. But there is also a steady progression in your practice as an artist. Someone could see the growth and development along your trajectory. Now, there aren't specific milestones that someone might say, well, at the 10-year mark, you're at mid-career, at 20-year mark, you're at mid-career. It's really going to depend on your individual progress as an artist. But when we start talking about the criteria of the award, which we'll get to in a moment, these career stages really play a role. And then, of course, a mature artist. So a mature artist is someone who has a lifelong investigation into their work. They've invested into the community and into arts and culture in Alaska, and their history of work really demonstrates a high aesthetic level of quality. And again, the project award is available across all career stages. So an emerging to a mature artist who has an idea for a one-year project can apply for a project award, but the fellowships are only available to artists at mid-career or mature. And like Monica said, there are fewer fellowships available every year. We also just wanted to be transparent and give you all a snapshot into what the submission rate looks like across the different disciplines. And so this is a capture of the applications that were submitted last year for project awards. And I'll say that this is pretty consistent. These are, you know, the numbers vary a little bit, but this is pretty consistent with what we see year to year, with visual arts always coming in with the most submissions, followed by music, literary arts, and then folk and traditional arts. We also want to call attention to a couple of key disciplines that have a lower representation, like choreography and dance, presentation, interpretation, or performance art. And we'll talk about what those disciplines are shortly. But we know that there are more than 2 great dance artists or dance arts groups and collaboratives working across Alaska. And we really encourage those artists to apply or reach out to us if you're curious if your work fits in with this program, because we do want to encourage those artists to apply and be awarded. And this is a snapshot of the fellowships, and you can see the numbers mirror that of the project awards. And like Monica mentioned, these rotate. So this year, the other 6 disciplines that you don't see on this screen that are recognized will be available for fellowships this cycle. And so those disciplines are these. And the foundation supports 11 distinct disciplines, but it's really intended to capture all art making. And so if you're not sure where your practice lies, again, reach out to us and we can help you find what discipline best speaks to you. And we won't spend the time defining all of these, but we do want to direct you to our guidelines that go in more detail into what these disciplines are. I do want to call out that media arts, multidiscipline, music, new genre, presentation and interpretation, and visual arts are part of the fellowship program this year. So if you are an artist working in those disciplines, you are eligible for both a project award or fellowship. If you are working in choreography, crafts, folk and traditional arts, literary arts, or performance arts, you are eligible for a project award. I do want to talk just briefly about a few of these disciplines that we often get a lot of confusion around, and that is the performance art category, presentation interpretation, and music or music composition. So performance arts is a live performance. It's a live work that is original, and it's developed with the intention of being performed in front of a live audience or viewed later virtually by an audience. And so this is more something that might fall under performance art is puppetry or something that has a live action elements. It's original works. Presentation interpretation is also live works presented and performed in front of an audience, but these are works that are pre-existing and being reinterpreted. So something like a theater company producing Shakespeare would be presentation interpretation. It's still live performance, but it's an existing work that is being reinterpreted. Now, music or music composition is also part of the performing arts, but in this context, it's a separate discipline. And that performance art discipline is really isolated to live art that is originally produced for an audience. So again, if you're not sure where you fit in terms of your discipline, just reach out to us and we'll help you decide which of these best suits your work. Something new that we added about 3 years ago is expanding the eligibility of the awards to groups or collaboratives. We've had the project awards now for about 18 years, and for the first 15 of those, it was only eligible to individual artists. And a few years ago, based on feedback we got from applicants, we really examined the accessibility of that program and realized that art making is a collaborative process. It's collaborative in nature. And so we wanted to expand the accessibility to groups or collaboratives. And for the context of this program, we define a group or collaborative as 2 or more individuals applying within one application. So this might be an ongoing group or a collaborative, or it could be time limited. It could be a choir that's been in place for 50 years, or it could be several different multidisciplinary artists coming together for a project and then they'll dissolve afterwards. What's important to keep in mind is that individual can only apply for one application. So if someone does have an individual practice as an artist, but are also part of a group or collaborative, that person needs to decide if they want to apply as an individual or as a group, because one person can only have one application. And that's true for project award or fellowship or in any other discipline. If you are applying for a project award, you cannot also apply for a fellowship. I'm going to turn it back to my colleague Monica to talk about eligibility.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the eligibility and the criteria for setting you up for success in terms of a strong proposal. Obviously, eligibility is the #1 thing that you're going to want to evaluate, and know that these are pretty hard and fast rules for the foundation. You must be an Alaska resident, living in Alaska for at least the last 2 years. And what we like to say is if you qualify for a PFD, then you're probably fine. We also recognize over the last couple of years with the pandemic that people have been working remote. If your situation is there's some nuance there, again, just reach out to us and have that individual conversation with us. You do need to remain in the state of Alaska during the duration of the grant. Grant cycles are usually a year or based on your timeline. You do need to be 18 years or older. And this one is really specific in terms of currently producing work. And so we want that to be current work that you're currently working on now. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The criteria is really about making sure that your artistic experience, it has a certain level of creative accomplishments and that there's a quality to it. We want to make sure that all of the applicants, and as the panel reviews each one of the applicants, that the applicant is really set up for that personal growth and that creative growth and that impact across the state. And then we really look for the completeness of the application. And again, there are lots of written pieces that you need to submit. And so we want to make sure that like all of your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted, and that can take a lot of I's. And so we just want to make sure to bring that to your attention. I will let Nzina talk about sort of the ineligible items because there are a lot of nuances to this aspect.
Thank you, Monica. Yeah, the application and the program is pretty broad, but there are a few key things that would make someone unable to apply. And those are if that person is currently enrolled in an art degree seeking program, meaning they are making work under the supervision of an instructor. Now, if someone is an artist and they're in a mathematics program seeking a degree in that program, that would not be an ineligible program. But if it is an art degree seeking program and that work is being made under the supervision of an instructor, that person would have to wait until they finished their program and have an independent body of work created, because artwork that was also created while that person was enrolled in that program would also be ineligible. The proposals can also not be intended for academic, scholarly research or commercial work. And we get a lot of questions about what commercial work is. And the best example we have for this is if the artist works primarily in graphic design and they work for a graphic design firm, and their project is to buy equipment for their business to improve their designs for their clients. That would be a really commercial endeavor. Or if someone is seeking seed funds to mass produce sculptures of polar bear, that would be more of a commercial endeavor and a business endeavor. And again, this project is for individual artists to strengthen those artists themselves. It's also a competitive program. So it's not an emergency or needs-based program. It's really based on the artistic quality, the growth of the artist, and the promise of that artist continuing to produce in their field. Someone who has in the past received an award must wait 3 solid years before applying again. So if an artist received an award in any of these 3 years, 2019 to 2021, they must wait 3 years before they can apply again, and they must use new work samples. So work samples from a previously successful individual artist award application cannot be reused. If they're from a different application altogether that was successful for a different funder or purpose, that is fine, but they cannot be reused from within your individual artist award application. I just want to speak a little bit to the selection panel. We also get lots of questions on who is this panel and who are making these decisions. Rasmussen Foundation staff do not make decisions on who the award recipients are. We review all of the applications for completeness, but we do not make any decisions or determinations. And sometimes it's really hard for us to be in those meetings when those decisions are being made. And sometimes we are grateful that that pressure is not on us because it is a very difficult process. But each year, the foundation gathers a diverse panel of experts from across the United States that are representative of each discipline. And this panel of experts gathers and reviews the applications in 3 different phases. One is an individual review where each panelist will be assigned a certain number of applications within their discipline for a first round review. The second round is when we gather the panelists working within a discipline. We call it discipline specific, but it's just the panelists that are all reviewing the same applications. They meet together to review all of the applications they reviewed individually and come up with a short list of candidates that go on to the final panel. And that final panel review is all of the panelists across disciplines. And that group of panelists make the really difficult decisions of the 25 project award recipients and the 10 fellowships. And I will tell you, these panelists are very serious about what they're doing. They're very, very invested in the success and the work that's being done in Alaska. So what are they looking for when they're reviewing your applications? They are looking for the same criteria that we ask of all of you. A demonstration of the artistic quality given your experience. And so this ties to your career stage. If you're an emerging artist, they will be viewing your work with the lens of viewing the work of an emerging artist. If you're an emerging artist that wants a fellowship because it's a higher award amount, they will still be reviewing your work. They will then be reviewing your work under the lens of a mid-career artist, and maybe your work isn't quite at that stage. So this is where really understanding where your career stage is very important. They're also going to be looking at your creative accomplishments, and they're doing this not because someone who has more exhibits than someone else is going to be higher prioritized, but they're doing this because they want to see evidence that you can complete what you're proposing. And if you have evidence through your resume that shows what you've done as an artist, that will help the panel feel confident that you can achieve what you're proposing to do within that 1 year period of time. They're also looking at why. Why now? Why is this important? How will this help you grow as an artist? This is an individual artist award. It's as much about the work as it is about you as an artist, and how can you communicate to the panel how this will help you grow. This award, completing this project, how will this help you grow, develop, advance in your own practice? And then of course, how thorough were you in completing the application? Now, applications that have missing criteria, for instance, if artist statement is not included, this is a base required document for the application. Those applications don't advance to the panel. So we really encourage that before you hit submit, you make sure everything you uploaded correctly, that every text box is filled out and filled out thoroughly. Because if a panelist doesn't get a sense of what your project is because it wasn't clearly identified, it might not be as complete of an application and be as competitive as some others. We also just want to call some attention to cultural appropriation. The Rasmussen Foundation is really committed to being responsible stewards of Alaska Native and Indigenous cultures and practices and values. And so a few years ago, we started working with a cultural content reviewer that reviews applications that have cultural content. And we do this because we want to make sure that we're being responsible stewards. Real quick, I'll just kind of define a best practice of cultural appropriation, which is the unacknowledged or inappropriate adoption of customs, practices, imagery, ideas of one people or society by members of another, and another that is typically more dominant. Conversely, when we see that there's responsible creative collaboration or a cultural exchange, what we see in those projects or in that process is that there's free, prior, and informed consent. There's shared control over process and product. There's acknowledgement and attribution. There's respect for cultural differences. There's reciprocity and benefit sharing. We're also excited to share that we have an upcoming panel discussion on cultural appropriation, art, and IAA that is being hosted by the Anchorage Museum on February 15th. We don't have a link to that event yet, but please watch our social media. We will be sharing out that event very soon. I also wanted to share some other opportunities. We've mentioned that this is a competitive grant process. We receive anywhere from 300 to sometimes up to 500 applications every year, depending on what's happening in our communities. And of those 300 to 500, 25 people get a project award and 10 get a fellowship. So it's very competitive, and the odds are quite challenging. And so we wanted to make sure that we're giving you some other opportunities across the state. And so the Alaska State Council on the Arts oversees 3 different art programs that some of you are probably already familiar with. One is the Harper Arts Touring, Cultural Collaboration, and Arts and Education. And all of these support organizations to work with artists to bring artists and performing groups throughout Alaska where there is limited access, to partner cultural workers with youth in cultural programs to learn traditional crafts and making, and then also sponsoring and supporting artists in the schools. We encourage you to reach out to Laura Forbes, who is the Director of Education at the Alaska States Council on the Arts, who oversees these programs and is wonderful to work with. Another opportunity that's relatively new and is COVID responsive at the Alaska State Council is the Adaptation and Innovation Grant Program. This is a program that is available to individuals. There are very few grant-making programs in Alaska that fund individuals directly. In fact, at the foundation, the Individual Artist Awards is the only program that we have permission from the IRS to fund individuals directly. And so it can be challenging as an individual artist to find these types of resources. So the Adaptation and Innovation Grant Program began a couple of years ago in response to COVID. It's continuing now as more of a recovery effort. And it's really to support artists to adapt or innovate their practice to continue being able to work as our communities are changing and how we move through our communities and share our craft and practices are changing. And these are grants up to $2,000 for individuals and up to $10,000 for groups or organizations. And again, we encourage you to reach out to Laura Forbes, who can help you through this process and let you know if this is something that would be a good fit for you. All right, I'm going to now turn it over to Megan to talk a little bit about opportunities specific to Fairbanks artists.
Thank you. While we don't have granting opportunities, we do have lots of opportunities for the various art forms here. We have visual arts for our visual artists. You know, we have our juried shows. We have one in the spring that takes place in April. And we have our 64th parallel, which takes place in October. We have portfolio review that happens every year for exhibition in the Bear Gallery that runs from August through October. And then what else do we have? We have open entries exhibitions like our membership show and limited edition. And we have the opportunity to have your work on display in the gift shop year round. We just have that application on our website. For our literary arts friends, we do readings monthly in the gallery. We have quite the variety of books in the gift shop. So if you have some books that you've written, you know, please feel free to apply to have your book in the gift shop. We would love to consider. And then we have our statewide poetry contest, which it happens December through February. The middle of February is when it's going to end. And that's, you know, people submit poetry and we have a Alaskan literary artist jury, and it's pretty exciting. We are in the midst of receiving many poems, and it's very cool to see those rolling in. For performing arts, we have our gazebo nights. That's nightly performances in the gazebo there on the screen in June, July, and August, and that's such a fun, engaging opportunity to play music for the all of Pioneer Park. And then for education, we have our artists in schools. You see Teal down there in her aerial silks. I just watched her at a school on Wednesday, and it was so inspiring, so amazing. We love working with artists to get them into schools. And if you're interested in something like that, please feel free to reach out. If you have any questions about any of these opportunities, we would be more than happy to talk with you and get you involved.
Thank you so much, Megan. All right, Monica, would you take us through some frequently asked questions?
Sure. So I think this is just a snapshot of the numerous questions that we received during the application process. But one of the big ones is, can I apply for more than one award? And the way that we say that is no. I mean, you either have to apply for an individual award or a group or collaborative project. The other thing is you can't apply for a project award and a fellowship. So you really need to figure out like where you land in any one of those boxes. if you've received an award in the past, can I apply again? Yes, but again, there's that 3-year waiting period before you can apply for another grant with the foundation. Is an individual artist award taxable? Yes, it is. However, neither myself or Enzina can give out legal advice, and nor would we want to ever put ourselves in that position. But what we do say is reach out to, people within your community who have dealt with this before, a tax accountant or some other expert that can actually help you figure out what your taxes look like, because it is taxable. And then what's my career stage? And Zena spoke a lot about like these 3 different categories. And again, emerging, mid-career, and mature. There's already some questions about that. I think it's really an individual conversation so that we can help support you in filling out that application and knowing which box to check. Enzina, is there anything else you'd like to add to this slide?
I don't think so. Just that this is an Alaska-based program for Alaska artists. So anyone who's part of the application, if it's a group or collaborative or an individual, must be a resident of Alaska.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so the next part, that's part 1 of the kind of fast and furious overview of the program. So we're going to move right into our workshop session. The first part of this is just going through the application portal. It will help guide you through the process so that you know what to look for and what to fill out when you get there. And then we'll break down the application itself, go over the narrative components, the artist statements, resumes, and the work samples. I will let you know now that once we get to that narrative portion, we are going to do an activity utilizing the breakout rooms. Karen behind the scenes has already put everyone in a breakout room, and when we're ready, she will send you there. We also want to acknowledge that not everybody is going to be comfortable going into those breakout rooms. So if you do not want to take part of this activity, you're welcome to stay in the main gallery. However, I do really encourage you to go into those breakout rooms. It's a really quick writing exercise that breaks down one of the actual narrative questions. So it helps you get a good jump start on how to approach this application. All right, so part 1 is the application walkthrough. Once you get to our website, you may see this landing page image. It's a slideshow, so this may not be what you see. If this pops up, you can click right on it to take you to the Individual Artist Awards page. If not, you can access it in a couple of different ways. You can click the tab that says Grants. You could click the tab that says Arts. If you've applied before, you can also circumvent all of this and just go to the grants logon. The portal that we use is called Smart Simple. There's a joke internally that it can neither be smart nor simple, but it gets the work done and is pretty user-friendly. So for the sake of this, I've clicked grants. So I've clicked grants. It takes me to the individual artist. It takes me to the grants page. Within the grants page is the Individual Artist Awards program. I click on that, and then it takes me to the project awards and fellowships. Now remember, the Individual Artist Awards also has the Distinguished Artist, but that's a completely separate process. It's done by nomination. And so you'll want to click on the project and fellowships page. Once you get to this page, I want to call your attention to these 3 buttons on the right. If you click Apply for IAA, it'll take you to the online portal. If you click Guidelines, it'll pull up the full guidelines describing the program, and we recommend that you print this out or download it and have it aside your screen as you're filling out the application. Next is the toolkits for artists. So this is something that we started putting on the website just a couple of years ago, and that toolkit will give you lots of different resources that are great for this application, but also great for building your portfolio for other grants or resources that you might be seeking. So then once you click Apply for IAA, it'll take you to your account setup and login. So if you've never set up an account before, this is what you will see, and it's your registration. So you're going to want to select either Individual Artist Award or Art Group. Now, if you're part of a group that is also a nonprofit organization, You may think about clicking the nonprofit button, but for the individual artist awards, you want to identify as either an art group or collaborative or individual artist itself. We do have other grant making for nonprofit organizations, and that's what would trigger these 3 buttons above, but for IAA, just those 2. And this will be important to distinguish as you start your application. The next page will bring you to your dashboard. And this is where you can start your application, but also where you can see other applications that you have in the queue if you've applied before. Any that are closed mean that if you were awarded and you submitted a final report and your grant period is closed, it will show up there. Or if you applied and were declined, your applications would show up there. If you have received an award and are active in that award, the award is still in process, or you have not yet submitted your final report, it will show up as active. And then anything that is unfinished, that maybe you started an application last year and you just never finished or submitted it, it would show up in your drafts. Or as you're working on this application, it will show up in your drafts as well until you hit submit. Before we start the application, just want to call attention to a few key dates to keep in mind. So the overall final online application date is March 1st. This is when it's 11:59 p.m. March 1st. Anything past that will be past the deadline, even if it's 12 o'clock. However, we do also accept paper applications, but paper applications have to be mailed in or delivered to the Rasmussen Foundation offices by February 14th. And the reason why it's earlier is because all of those applications and the attached work samples must be manually entered, and it gives staff time to do that and to reach out to the artist if something is missing. A couple of years ago, we also started doing a draft review deadline, and this is February 14th as well. It's Valentine's Day, so it's easy to remember every year. And the draft review deadline is for staff to review your application for completeness. If you get your application into us by that date, staff will review it and say, yep, everything's complete, everything's opening, everything's uploaded, we'll pass it on to the panel. However, if we catch something like, oh, your Zoom or the YouTube link is set to private and we can't open it, we can reopen your application and give you a chance to complete it. So once you're ready to start your application, go ahead and hit Start Application. And then it'll take you through the full application. And this ribbon above just goes through the different elements of the application. The instructions, of course, mimic the guidelines, and we encourage you to go through those. It really defines the program pretty thoroughly. Next is your cover sheet. And this is where you will pick the award you are applying for, the project award or fellowship, your career stage, what your discipline is. And again, if you're an individual or a group, and this is important because this will change some of the questions in your application. We also, at this point, ask you to take a look at your contact information and make sure that it's accurate. So when we try to call you or email you, we have the most up-to-date information. If you are a group or collaborative, you will see this page. If you are an individual, you won't see this. So you are required to enter the name of your group. If you are a multi-discipline artist collective that has just come together for a specific project, and so you don't really have a name, work out a name that you can use for this and know that that name can be changed. We also want to know how many members are in your group. We want to know how many members are at large, and then how many have any type of leadership or ownership of the group. And we call these people, the folks who have that leadership or ownership. For the sake of this application, we call those folks collaborators, and we need to know how many of those people are in your group. Here we've said 4, and then once you say that, you will be able to enter the names of each of these members and their career stage. And this is super important because if you have any type of leadership or ownership in this group and you are awarded, each of these people would have to wait that mandatory 3-year wait before applying. But we know that groups might be expansive, like a 60-person choir, and not all 60 people have any type of leadership and maybe come and go. And so if that's the case for the type of group you work with, just the overall number of how big this group is. Every application is required for a timeline. And again, this is more evidence to the panel that you've thought this project through and that it's achievable within that 1 year. The grant period for this is July 1st to June 31st. So projects must start at July 1st and end by June 31st. And the timeline can be broad. We understand timelines change, especially in the last couple of years. We are grown to acknowledge that, and we communicate that with the panelists, but really kind of flesh out where you're starting with this program at July 1st and then where you'll be by June 31st. And if it's a 3-month or 6-month project, that's okay. Just make sure to communicate that. And then if you're applying for a project award, you will be required to submit a budget that comes to $7,500. If you're unsure about eligible expenses, reach out to us. There are so many expenses that are never captured by the artist. And the feedback we get from panelists over and over again is not to forget to pay yourself. If you are applying for a fellowship, you do not need to submit a budget because a fellowship is seen as more broad, and the what can be done over that year is a little bit more expansive. And finally, work samples. So work samples are a critical part of your application, really making sure that your work samples are strong and clear, that you have each text box filled. If you do not have these text boxes filled, you will not be able to submit the application. You will get a warning to go back. And if you're trying to submit at 11:59, it may mean that you missed the deadline. It's also a really great opportunity for you to describe your work and to give context of your work to the panel. The panelists are really informed. They're very committed, smart people. We orient them to Alaska. We tell them and share with them the perspectives of Alaska artists and what makes it unique about making work in Alaska, but they don't know the uniqueness of your work. And so this is another opportunity, in addition to the narrative components, to not only talk about what the work is made out of, but to give a little bit more of a description for the panel so they can really understand your work. And then we get to the submission. One note and one tip that we share is that we really encourage artists to work outside of the application in something like a Word doc or notes or something like that. Cut and paste and then put that into the portal. We say that because even the best online systems have glitches or crash. And we know in Alaska that sometimes unexpected situations like earthquakes, etc., might interfere with our technology. And if something were to happen and your work wasn't saved and you lost power and you had been working on your application for hours and then you lost that, it can be quite devastating. So work outside, cut and paste, save. And then before you hit that submit, view your PDF, make sure that everything you put in your application reads the way you want it to. Every link opens, every attachment is attached the right orientation. Once all of that is done, click agree and submit your application. If you save your draft, it will not submit the application. So always make sure to hit that submit button. And again, those deadlines to keep in mind are the 14th of February and March 1st. Okay, so we're moving right into the narrative portion. And so in just a couple minutes, we're going to do that writing exercise. So have your writing implements handy. And before we get there, I just want to talk about what the narrative components are in the application. And the narrative components are those writing components. And the first part is a 100-word, a very brief, clear and concise overview of your proposal. What is your project? And this is the first thing the panelists will read. So it's a really good opportunity to get their attention. The next question is, what will you do if you receive the award? What is the focus of your project or fellowship? So this is where you have a little bit longer. You have 250 words here and for the next questions to talk about what you want to do and what your project is. And then the next question gets to speak to that part about enriching and advancing your career as an artist and how it's going to impact your growth. So how will this proposal or project advance or enrich your growth and development? Why now? Why are you undertaking this project? How will this help you grow? How will this push your practice further? And then this fourth question really gets to the passion of your project and why your work is unique. So why is your work important to you, your audience, and your community? And this is really a great opportunity to talk directly to the panelists. And again, these are panelists who are really informed and working artists and working within arts administration, but they don't know you and they don't know the uniqueness of your work. And so speak to them just like you would speaking to a loved one about why you're passionate about what you do. And then again, the timeline and the budget. And again, the budget is only required for the project awards. Now we've talked, our language around these has been awards and grants, and the foundation is a grant making organization. So these are grants. And when we're thinking about writing grants, we really want to think about making sure we're clear, concise, consistent, compelling. And we want to make sure that those applications are thorough and complete. You know, these, we looked at the snapshot of submissions, and some panelists might be reviewing 30 applications or 50 or more applications. And so you really want to make sure that you're editing out, you're editing down, you're cutting out any buzzwords or jargon that really doesn't define your work, so that these panelists get a sense of what you're doing right off the bat. All right, tonight we're super happy and lucky to be joined by one of last year's project award recipients, Mayate Agopian. And Mayate is going to share with us her perspective and her approach to the application. Mayate, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Hi, okay, I'm on mute. Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for inviting me tonight. I applied last year, a year ago, for the as an emerging artist for the project award under the performance art, as I'm a puppeteer, which means making puppets, developing stories and presenting it a way or another, either online or directly. I remember well, because that was exactly a year ago, and that took pretty much the whole month to really work on this application. For me, my first goal was to reach the first deadline, the draft review deadline. That was a personal goal I had, first because I really wanted to make sure I wouldn't forget any silly link, and if I had the opportunity to have someone who could just tell me it was fine, then it was feeling better about it. But also because I can procrastinate quite a lot. I think it's easy to do so. And when I have a final deadline, because it takes so much time at the end, I was scared that by having having an earlier deadline really allowed me to maybe pass that date a little bit, but at least making sure I had everything in and not be taking off in the last few days or hours of the application. I just have a few points I would like to share with you. One was really doing my homework by reading everything, all the toolkits, making copies of them, printing them, reading them over, making sure every step and every kind of, even the vocabulary, the ideas, all the boxes were checked. And so that was very important for me. And the second one was really to put the time. I took many days to write this up. English is maybe not also my first language, so it maybe takes me longer than others. But I copied everything from the website, put everything in a Google Doc, and made sure that I was reading it in a doc, so I knew how many words I had, and I could constantly go back to refine and make it clearer and clearer and stronger, and I never worked into the online platform because it took that time to kind of think about it and dream about it and come back and go back and forth. And so that was really important. It was it is a process. But once I had done my homework and I worked my grant, the really very important point for me was that I reached out to the foundation, and that was very important for me. It was very scary. I think sometimes we tend to do our things in our own part, and we want to know if we're on the right place, but sometimes it's just hard to seek and ask for some help or answer some question. And I had some very specific questions, and I asked them all, and I got I got so much support and kindness and positive feedback that pushed me to continue what I was doing. And I was even surprised actually I got answer to my question, but I also got the offer to have my page read. And I got some constructive feedback that were general, but were important, general and specific enough so that I could go back and actually reframe some of my sentences to make my work stronger. And of course, then you get someone to edit your final work, but that part was very important and very constructive, I would say. The choosing the work sample can be a little bit hard, especially if you are an emerging artist. You might not have as much. As a performer, you might not have a lot of videos or pictures of things that you do. So that can be a little bit tricky, and I would really suggest to take a lot of time for that. It's actually much longer process than I thought, especially if you start putting videos, you have to edit them, you have to make sure it works, so that for me took over a few days, and yeah, there's important and also to put them in the orders that that what your narrative says, the pictures kind of relate to what you're saying in the story. That was something that was important for me. So to conclude, it was very intensive process. I think like every grant that you write is intensive. But what I really remember the most, and that was very important for me, is that when I was done, I was really happy. I realized that I had finally put a lot of time to try to express my thought and my work and what I wanted to do, why I wanted to do it, and how I wanted to do it. And I really felt at that point that even if I wouldn't get the grant, I would be fine. I knew what I was going to do. I would have to get money somewhere else, but that feeling of like that work put into the grant writing was actually a very important process, maybe particularly for an emerging artist, to define yourself. And so I'm cheering for you all, and I hope this process will be as good for you, and good luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Maite. It's so wonderful to hear directly from you on your process and your experience. And this excerpt that we're seeing on the screen is from Maite's response to the question on why is this work important? And we won't read it, but I just want to call attention to Maite really clearing that up for the panel. For me, puppetry is important not only as inspiration and a voice, but also a tool. And then Maite defines what that means to her. Puppetry is a window into art, culture, science, and technology, and then defines what that means. So it's really giving the panelists a really clear picture of what this work means to Maite, and then what that can mean to the community around her. And so that's a really great introduction into our breakout room activity, where we will workshop the question, why is your work important to you, your audience, or your community? And this is a 15-minute activity. Again, Karen has already put you in a room. Those room leaders are Karen, Megan, Monica, and Zuli. And so in just a moment, we will send you to those rooms. And the first step is, I think we have too many people tonight to go around and introduce yourselves, but your room leader will introduce themselves to you, invite you to take 3 minutes to just brainstorm why your work is important. It's a brain dump. Just get all of that out on the page. And then in the next 4 minutes, we'll ask your peers in your room, we'll ask you to share out to your peers what you wrote and get feedback on what they heard you say. So the idea is to get out what your thoughts are and then communicate that to your peers and hear back if what you've communicated was interpreted the way you intended. And then we'll repeat that for as long as we have time. Again, if you're not comfortable going into the breakout room, you're welcome to stay in the main gallery where I will be, but I super encourage you to work with your peers in this activity. All right, Karen, are we all ready to go? Okay, yes, all right, Karen, let's open those breakout rooms. All right, we are all back in our main gallery and we are getting close to our ending time. So I do want to encourage folks to put in the chat. Thank you so much for working through that activity with us. You know, our goal is that it gives you an opportunity to start brainstorming how you're going to approach this application and those specific questions. And so if you found something particularly useful, or if there's an element that you want to learn more about, please put that in the chat. I'm going to go back to the presentation so we can walk through just a few more items during our time together. We do have this scheduled till 7 o'clock, but we can go over a few minutes. We have blocked out to 7:15. So if we get to 7 o'clock and you need to take off, please, we want to be mindful of your time, but if you want to stick it out with us for 15 more minutes, we are on this call until 7:15. So another element we wanted to talk about was your artist statement. And this is another opportunity to speak to your passion and your uniqueness of your practice with the panel. And so the artist statement is really the what, the why, and the how of your work as an artist. And we want you to approach this, or we suggest you approach this the same way you just approached that narrative activity, by first doing a brainstorm. And one note we want to say about the artist statement is that this artist statement is an overarching snapshot of your work as an artist, not specific to the proposal. So this is giving a panel a glimpse into who you are as an artist and how it kind of applies as an umbrella to all of your art making. The narrative portions is where you talk specifically about the project. So really just start brainstorming those W's, the who, the what, the when, the why, and the how of your work. What are you trying to do in your work? What's that passion piece? Or the physicality piece? What are you trying to make? What are you trying to say? Why are you doing it? Why is it important to you in your community? And then how? What's your discipline? What's your craft? Once you kind of brainstorm it out, start pulling out words from that brainstorm and start putting it in an outline. And then take that outline and flesh out those ideas and those words until you get a more formulated statement. And then just start editing out jargon, editing out extra words that you don't need. Monica and I did this afternoon in this presentation, just cutting out extra words that weren't needed. So do the same thing with your statements, proofread it. And then I always recommend giving it to 2 people. Someone who knows your art or is familiar with the arts, and then someone who isn't, and ask them what they're reading or what they're hearing and what you're saying, just like with that other activity, to make sure that you're communicating what you most want to communicate about yourself. Some statements to avoid, and this is what we hear from panelists, is generalizations that don't speak to the uniqueness of your work. My work is about my experiences. Well, what are those experiences and why are they relevant to your practice as an artist? My work is intuitive. I do it because I have to. Again, these generalizations don't speak to your specific craft and practice. This is an excerpt of Mayate's artist statement. Some strong elements are really specified chunks that speak to why you're making your work. What I love about puppetry are its possibilities, its power to touch, open new doors, etc. It's intrinsically diverse, open. Puppetry is music and rhythm. Puppetry is inspiration. So Mayate is really communicating in this statement why puppetry matters to her, what she sees in it, and what she sees it bringing to other cultures. And this is what will pull the panel in, because they want to be inspired by what inspires you. Another required attachment is the artist resume. And this is just an opportunity to capture your history, reflect on your accomplishments or activities or training as an artist. This should not include anything outside of your art practice. It shouldn't include your experience as a pilot unless that's part of your art practice. So really specific to your art making, keep it clean, succinct, and easy to read, and one page. Panelists are only required to read one page of your statement and one page of your resume. So it's not a CV, it's not a capture of everything, it's just most relevant. And this is some basic information, but it's going to change based on your practice. So real basic, you want to make sure you have your contact information, wherever you learned your practice, if it was traditional education, if it was training, if it was apprenticeship, mentorships, if you worked under a mentor or advisor, any type of exhibition or performance or publication, and then anything else that's relevant to your practice, residencies, any press or media coverage, grants, fellowships, etc. We also have a few templates on our website. Under our toolkit, we have 3 different resume templates that you could upload and then just plug your data in. And this is just a really basic outline. And again, these headings are going to change based on your experience. And we have samples of these on the website. You can just plug in your information. You can also enter a more narrative resume or historical capture of your work in the application as well. Some things that we see that are often just left out of residencies are basic contact information, things out of order, implying something happened when it didn't, or missing some elements like associated state or country. Let's see. And then just a snapshot again into the mind of the panelists as they're reviewing your work. So these are questions that were comments to artists from reviewing their applications. And these all speak to elements that were left off. So what does it mean to you to create a new body of work? What specifically are you looking to create? The panel didn't really understand the full perspective or vision of the artist. The panel didn't really understand why it was important for the artist at that point in time to undertake this project. The narrative questions weren't as fleshed out as the artist statement. So really making sure that there is that consistency across the statements, across the narrative portions, across the work samples. Something we also just want to real briefly touch on, because sometimes we have feedback of, well, how do I get this award? You know, I've been applying for years and years and years, and I haven't gotten an award, and I just want to give up. Like, what am I doing wrong? And it's not an easy answer. It's not an easy question to answer, because sometimes there's nothing that you're doing wrong. And so really we encourage artists to focus on presenting the best package of your work. Like Mayate said, really invest your time in the work. And then once you have that complete package, you can let it go and let go of the outcome. So really thinking about what makes your practice or project compelling and unique. How is it creating an application that a panelist says, I want to go back to this one. I'm making a note. I want to go back to this application. And then really revising it, making sure that your work samples are strong, that you have everything uploaded correctly. And then once you feel really confident about the application portfolio and package you put together, really letting go of the outcome. One of the panelists says that she considers, she's a practicing artist, and she says, I consider this just a technical administrative part of my practice. I put my work in the application and then I hit send and I forget about it. It's just an administrative task, and then I focus on the other things I have going on. So really diving deep into presenting that complete package and then hitting submit. And then knowing that if you don't get awarded, that maybe it's just not your year. The following year, there's a whole other new panel that are going to be reviewing your work. All right, this is the last portion, and I know we're going to go over time. So this is just some examinations of work samples, some tips for making really successful work samples and how to improve yours. So if you've got to hop off the call, we understand, but if you want to stick around for another 15 minutes, we welcome you to keep joining us. So we'll start with some video and audio work samples. And so real basic advice is to make sure that your video image or your audio is in focus and clear. And so if you have imagery in your video, you want to make sure it's focused, there isn't blurs or uneven edits. You want to make sure that it's clear, that the panelist knows what they're looking at, that the lighting is balanced across the entire composition of the video, that the sound quality for both a video and audio sample are clean and crisp, and that the panel doesn't have to strain to hear or see what they're reviewing. And that what's real important is that your video and audio clips are either edited and clipped per the time limit that's allowed or queued up. You have a total of 10 minutes for video and audio samples, and that can be one 10-minute long, or it can be broken up into various elements of that. And so these panelists, again, are reviewing multiple applications, 30, 40 applications. And if they see an hour-long work sample that's not been queued up, they're not going to know where to look. And they might just look at the first 3 minutes, and maybe those are just the intro. So make sure you either clip exactly what you want the panelists to look at, or queue it up for the panelists so that they know what 3-minute section, what 5-minute section, etc. Some basic examples, and these might be obvious, but making sure that that image is not blurry, or it doesn't take 30 seconds to go into focus, because again, these panelists are moving through these applications. And if it takes 30 seconds to go into focus, they might say, okay, I'm going to go to the next work sample. And then making sure that if you are using a web-based system like YouTube, that your videos are set to either public or unlisted. If they are private, the panel and staff are going to be unable to open them. And every year this happens. It happened multiple times last year for different applications. We go to open up the work sample and it's set to private. And so it's super unfortunate, making sure it's either published or unlisted. In terms of audio samples, I just want to play a couple of different varieties of audio samples that are totally acceptable. So this is an audio sample uploaded to YouTube, and it's just a black hold space, but it's totally acceptable as an audio sample. It's great quality. There's no imagery, but it's an audio sample. And those artists are Dumoulin, who received an award last year. The other sample that would be totally acceptable for an audio is just an MP3. Just uploading an MP3. This is Nasei, who received a project award last year. Sorry about that. So again, very different ways of submitting audio work, both totally acceptable. And this is another sample of an audio submission for a musician. That is a fully produced video, another way of submitting audio work. And then a sample of a film, and I won't go here, but this is a filmmaker, Bjorn Olsen, who received an award last year. A really great sample of a high quality filmmaking or media sample, and we recommend you search for this on YouTube. But really clean imagery, perfectly queued up, really strong work sample. If you are submitting work under literary arts, you want to make sure that it's a clean, well-written, clearly produced work sample that is within the word limit. I think, Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, but our work sample is limited to 15 pages. Karen will let me know if I'm wrong there. And this could be one chunk or it could be several different work samples. But you just want to make sure you're following the guidelines so that you're not exaggerating fonts if it's not part of the craft of the work, that you're not trying to stretch margins out so you can actually submit like a 30-page manuscript within the page count limit. Some basic guidelines. Make sure the track changes are off. And this happens every year as well. A work sample is submitted and the track changes aren't turned off. So, the panelists will still look at this, but it might give them pause on the level of career stage or professionalism of that artist. So just making sure that things like track changes are off. And then some good examples by 2 recipients from last year. 2 different styles, one an excerpt from a novel, very clean margins, very clearly produced. The other an excerpt from a screenplay. So both very clear, structured a little bit differently, but they're excerpts that the artist has chosen to give to the panel to get a really good idea of what the story is. In terms of visual work or images, you just want to make sure that your focus is on the work and that you're limiting any distractions that are there around. So you want to make sure the background is neutral. We say white, black, or gray, but really that the focus is on the piece itself and not the environment, unless it's an installation or that's part of the process, that you're using the most natural light that you can, and that light is even across the surface of the work. And that if you need to crop out excessive imagery or excessive space behind the piece, that you're doing so. And then we recognize that hiring a photographer is sometimes an extra expense and not everyone has access to. So we have in our toolkit that's on our website, rasmussen.org, we have a tips for documenting your artwork on a smartphone. So if you don't have access to a camera, there's some really great techniques with using your smartphone to get a really strong work sample. And we'll just run through some examples of good or poor quality. And so this is a collage of different work samples, and we would say that this work sample needs improvement. We're not sure what we're looking at. It looks like it might be in progress. Is this one piece? Is it several pieces? Is the artist trying to break the rules of limited work samples because they're throwing 7 pieces in one? So we're just not really sure what we're looking at here. Now, this would be a good quality work sample. It shows dimension, it's evenly lit. We can zoom in and get some details. There's no distractions around it. The panel has a really good sense of this work and know what they're looking at. Now, this work sample needs some work. We're not sure if it's finished. It looks like it could be still in process. There's lots of things distracting it. But if the artist cropped in and just showed the work itself, it might be a strong work sample. This is a good work sample. It's a good shot of detail. Now, if this artist submitted this as a work sample, they would want to show another angle to the artist, which would take up 2 of those work samples. And then finally, we always recommend not to show yourself with your work. Don't show a selfie of yourself holding up the artwork. However, if a body or yourself is important to communicate the message of the work, like this wearable piece is, then it would be acceptable to include a figure or a person in the artwork. But if it's yourself holding your work or someone else standing by your work, it's too distracting. The focus should be on the work itself. All right. With that, lastly, before we hop over to the Q&A, we'll have about just a few minutes to get some of those burning questions. I just want to show, this is a courtesy of Karen Lowell. We just show this to show how artwork can be elevated when using a photographer. The image on the right was a really good, strong photo that Karen took off of her iPhone. And then the image on the left is the same piece, but taken by a photographer. And so it can really elevate your work. And that's something that you can include in your budget for a project award or fellowship, is working with a professional photographer. All right, I'm going to stop there for the next about 7 minutes. We're only going to have time to get through a couple of questions, but Megan, I'm going to turn it over to you to help kind of guide us through a really quick Q&A.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. And first, I want to say thank you to the Rasmussen team for putting this together. It's been an amazing opportunity. If we don't get to your questions today, there are so many great resources on their toolkit, so make sure you check that out. And also, I've seen in the chat that they will accept questions at arts@rasmussen.org. So make sure you email your questions if we don't have time to get to them this evening. With that being said, are there any questions?
You can use the raise your hand feature or just unmute and shout it out.
I guess I have a question. For what is chosen, there's a lot more visual artists that apply. Does that mean that a lot more visual artists are chosen, or is it you try to choose one from each subject area regardless of how many apply?
That's a really great question, Iris. I think that's,
yes,
we never know.
Yes.
With display names, but that's a really great question. And we communicate the importance of the diversity of disciplines and representation to the panelists. So the panelists are mindful of that and do try to make sure that the majority of the disciplines are represented. However, we can't guarantee that every year, every discipline will be selected. For instance, we had no applications in new genre, so there will not be an award in the new genre discipline. And it really depends on the quality of the work. If there are few applicants in a discipline and they might not be strong, that discipline may not be awarded. But what we've seen over the last few years is that there is a representation across the disciplines. So we try to make sure the panelists are mindful about that.
Thank you. Carrie, I saw that you had a question.
So multidisciplinary, can
Yeah.
I be multidisciplinary just as me, or does that only happen for a group?
Great question. You can absolutely be a multidisciplinary individual artist. And so multidisciplinary means that you work across disciplines. I'm a practicing artist. I consider myself multidiscipline. So if your practice incorporates more than one specific discipline, then that would mean multidiscipline. As such, too, if you're a literary artist who's illustrating your own book, you would be, in one way that's a literary art project, another way it's visual art, so you can apply as a multidiscipline artist for that as well. Does that help answer?
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
Cool. I see that there are some questions from the chat here. So does collaboration need to include only Alaskans?
Yes, so it is an Alaska-based program and award. So every member of the group has to be Alaskan, and they also have to be 18 or over. And we've gotten this question from different groups that have multi-ages in the groups, but it's intended to go back into Alaska, enrich Alaska cultural resources. So Alaska residents are the only eligible applicants.
Phoebe, I see that you have your hand raised.
Oh yeah, hello. I don't know if you can hear me because my internet's been really bad, but I was wondering about the artist's resume and whether you can include things like, like curatorial projects or teaching, that kind of thing, or if it should just be like, the things you'd mentioned, exhibition history and all that.
Absolutely include those things. Yeah, curatorial experience, teaching experience, anything that's relevant to your art practice. Or if you want to include workshops that you've taken or taught, yeah, those are absolutely relevant things to add.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is some questions from the chat. Can you define new genre?
Yeah, so new genre is basically anything that doesn't fit within any of the other disciplines. And we often see new genre where we see new technologies, something like augmented reality might be a new genre. So anything that's really kind of breaking the field in terms of kind of advancements that are outside of any particular discipline. If you're working across disciplines, that would be more like multidiscipline, but anything that's kind of cutting edge would be new genre.
Are there any other questions? Oh, paying for our time, can that be included in the project award budget?
Yes, and I saw this come up in the chat. Yes, paying for your own time is absolutely acceptable to include. And now we want to be careful with this because the whole project can't be paying for yourself. Of course, we see that come up, and if someone is wanting to take a significant amount of time off, talk with us about what will be included in that time. But panelist feedback overwhelmingly is, we see how generous these artists are. They have stipends for other artists in their budgets. They're paying other people, but they're not paying themselves. So panelists want to see you paying yourself. And things I'm seeing coming up in the chat: childcare, elder care, lodging, living expenses, travel. Absolutely, those are eligible expenses in your project budget. All right, Megan, we're at our 7:15 hard stop time.
All right, well, thank you, Interior and Fairbanks residents, for joining us. It was so great to see your faces, and I hope you have a lovely evening. And thank you again, Rasmussen.